What was your first memory of Falls Village? What's the first thing you remember about Falls Village?
Falls Village. Oh my gosh. The first recollection I have of Falls Village was when we lived up on the Amy, what was it, Amy, what's her name?
Amy Barnes.
Amy Barnes' house, barn and house is up on top of Music Mountain. My father was a farmer there during World War II, and I remember us being out in the field hauling rocks off the field with a wooden sled and a horse. And I was out there in the middle helping him at that age. I must have been, at the time, I must have been 3 or 4, somewhere in there, plodding around in my big boots, helping him throw stones on the stone boat, but I didn't throw very many stones, I don't think, at that age. But I went through the motions. That's the first thing I recall about Falls Village.
That was on Music Mountain?
Music Mountain, the Amy Barnes farm, yeah.
The first thing I remember about Falls Village was probably being about 2 years old. This is a strange memory, but the first thing I remember was being about 2 years old and using the outhouse with my mother. She would take me out to the outhouse when she had to go, because we didn't have an indoor bathroom. When they bought the house, there was the only running water was in the kitchen. There was no running water anywhere else in the house. And there was a little room next to the kitchen, which in those old houses, the house was built in 1750 something, I think. It was a very old house. And in those old houses, there was what they would call the birthing room, which was off of the living room next to the kitchen. It was a very tiny room, apparently, where the women had their babies. And in that room, there was a bathtub, but the bathtub wasn't connected to anything. So my father would fill up buckets of water, and then he'd carry them into the bathtub, and then fill up the bathtub, and my mother would take a bath, and then they would have to empty out the bathtub with buckets and throw the water out.
The water was heated with a wood stove, I'm sure, right?
I think he had a hot water heater.
Oh, yeah?
He had a
Oh,
hot
okay.
water heater. We did have a big wood stove, but he had a hot water heater. And I can remember being about 2 years old after trips to the outhouse. I remember that, but also they had a big green tub in the kitchen, and they would fill that up for me, and I would take my little bath in the big green tub. I probably was about 3 or 4 years before they finally got a bathroom in the house. My father put it in himself, which is why it took so long, because he was always late doing things and never finished things, but he did finish the bathroom.
So he was a dairy farmer?
He was a dairy farmer.
And how many brothers and sisters do you have?
3 sisters and a brother.
Uh-huh.
My father probably would have preferred 3 brothers and a sister, so he'd have more help on the farm. But
Well, you must have had chores on the farm.
some, but most of what we did was in the house. My father was, I remember asking once if I could learn to drive the tractor, because I wanted to drive the tractor, and he didn't let me because he felt it was too dangerous. He was kind of protective of women. I guess he thought women should be in the house doing the cooking and the freezing and all that, and the men should be outside.
Right.
But that's the very first thing I remember is using an outhouse. And we called it the Johnny house. I don't know why he called it Johnny house, but that's what we called it. It was a Johnny house.
Yeah.
Falls Village was a good place to grow up. It was an excellent place to grow up. Not very exciting, I guess, but
Everybody knew each other?
everyone knew each other. At that time, it was a lot of farming, a lot of farming. So on a day like today, or maybe in June, you would see farmers out everywhere baling their hay, except for my father, because he was always late, but everybody else would be baling their hay. Like my father didn't have a baler, so someone who had a baler would come help my father. Like Paul's father came once and helped him, but I think he had wires. My father didn't like the wires around the bales, he liked the twine. Frank Howe would come and help him, so people would come, and then they would go, my father would go help somebody else when they had baling to do, put the bales in the barn, but people were always helping each other.
We used to go camping a lot. We did a lot of camping in the summer.
Oh, really?
And we used to go across the brook. Plus we had a swimming hole down there, which was called Cortesi's Hole. It was known as Cortesi's Hole for generations. A lot of people used to swim down there on the Hollenbeck Club River.
Ah.
And we had it dammed up. Every year we used to have a damming party, and we get down there and dam the river up again because the floods in the spring would knock it down. And we used to camp down there. We had giant elm trees with ropes in them. We used to swing out over the water and drop in the water and play tag and all kinds of crazy things. It was quite the nice little hole. So there was a lot of swimming area and shallow areas where kids could wade and big rocks that people could lay on and get a sunburn if they wanted to. And then above it we had a camping area. So, and above that we used to have a place called the Pines. We used to camp up in there, which was away from the swimming hole. But
This is where the Hollenbeck Club is now?
no, it was on the Hollenbeck River, which was down the road from where we lived in Huntsville.
Do you know
Okay.
where he grew up? Where the farm was? His farm was?
Our farm, you know where Dean's vegetable stand was?
Yes.
The house on top of the hill there on the right, which is a big gray house with a big porch on it. My sister lives there now. Across the road, there used to be a bunch of barns, and that was where our farm was. And then down back of those farms, or barns, was the Hollenbeck River. Just like where Dean's vegetable stand is, or was.
Go way
Down
back.
down there was the Hollenbeck River. So we were bordering Dean's, and the Hollenbeck River bordered our lands down there. I went through our lands. So we used to go there and do all kinds of, we were outside, used to horseback ride over there and all kinds of crazy things. I even ran away from home once, went over there for a week.
A week you ran away from home?
You ran
Oh, your
away
mother
from-
must have been so happy.
Camped in the swamp, and my neighbors would bring me food. So my parents didn't
I
worry
guess
about
your
it.
mother wasn't really looking for you.
They didn't worry
was
about
she?
it. They knew I was doing all right.
Why did you run away from home?
Some obnoxious thing, probably. I forget exactly what I ran away for. I just said I'd had enough, you know. But anyway, we always did a lot of outside stuff. And we used to do also, between the two houses where my sister lives now and where the Wrights live, we had I'd say it was maybe an acre and a half of land. And we had a racetrack out there. And we used to race cars around.
Really?
Do 180s, 360s, all kinds of crazy things
You're
with
still
those cars.
doing that.
And as a matter of fact, when I went to take driver ed, Mr. Gregory, he took me out once. He said, no, and he knew I did this racing on the side. He took me out once. He said, all right, Cortesi, from now on you go to the library. No sense you coming to driver ed, you know. So I took the classroom part of it, the driver end of it, you know, where you go out on the road. And I didn't bother doing that. But we used to do all kinds of things to cars out there. The nicest car I ever had out there was a 35 Ford Coupe with a rumble seat that I found down in the Hanlan's Meadow one day. And it still had gas in it from the 40s, I guess. It was sitting out there, that and another car, a 38 Chevy. And Joe Hanlon, young Joe, not old Joe, who drove our school bus, I approached him one day and said, Joe, you know that car down there in the field? That 35 Ford? He said, yeah. He said, you want it? I said, yeah. He said, go get it. So I went down there with the tractor. There were no wheels on it, no radiator on it, no gas tank on it, a woodchuck hole coming up through the floorboards inside. Jacked it up, put some wheels on it, towed it home, and I put a gallon of gas on the above the dash on the outside and ran it down to the carburetor after I got a radiator for it and a carburetor for it and an ignition system for it. And it ran, started right up. Didn't even change the oil in it. It was the original oil in it that it had. And then I needed more gas, of course, so I went back to the 38 Chevy and drained the gas out of that. And it said that worked beautifully. Of course, it was probably leaded gas. That's probably why it worked so well. And we ran quite a while on that 38 Chevy gas in my old Ford up there in the field. But that was a beautiful old car. And when I went into the service, I gave it to Freddie Wright. No, I gave it to Eugene Wright. And Eugene sold it to Freddie, and Freddie Wright, who's dead now, cut the fenders off the darn thing and made it into where they used to run in Lebanon Valley. They used to run these. They were not a drag, demolition derby type car, I think it was. But he just, I think it was a demolition derby. But anyway, he ruined the car. You know.
There used to be a nice skating pond too that everybody used to skate on in the wintertime on
Yeah.
Kellogg Road. It's not there. There's just all that's there now is little weeds and a few cattails and things, but at the time, that was where everyone in the town would go to skate. There was a big skating pond, and they'd have a fire. There was a rock there, and they'd have a fire right next to the rock, and everybody would go there to skate. That was the big, except me. I didn't go because I didn't have any skates. Didn't have any skates, but everybody went. But I did, my mother dug some old black men's hockey skates out of her aunt's attic. They were really old. And so I decided one day I was going to paint the skates white so they would look like girls' figure skates. What was my mind thinking of? So I said, I'll paint these white and I'm going to walk over to Kellogg's Pond, which was quite a walk from the end of, well, we called it the mosquito path then, but the Page Road all the way over to Kellogg's Pond. So I painted these little black skates with white paint and slung them over my shoulder, and I went there and I skated, but everybody kind of made fun of me because they said, what did you paint those men's hockey skates white for? So I never went back again. That was the last time I went. But we did have, in the corner of Page Road and 126, it would get very wet in the wintertime, and so there was like a little bit of ice that would freeze there. So that was where I would usually skate. And I was so pathetic, wasn't I? I would put on an old ballet costume that I had, we were skaters one year at a ballet recital. It was this little glittery ballet skater's costume with little white fuzz around the bottom. And I would put that on, and I would go out and skate like I was in the Olympics. I would pretend I was in the Olympics. And I would even bow out there because everybody was cheering for me. And I'm sure people probably drove by and said, it's really crazy, that girl. What is she doing? But I was happy. I was very happy. I was having this wonderful time.
I'm glad you didn't get a picture of that. The only time we ever saw George Dean's father, Ray Dean, was when he wanted a cow bred, and he'd march that cow up the road to our bull, and they'd have a party out there, and the old cow would get bred.
Watch.
And everybody would be watching the cow being bred, and then Ray would go home. You know, I don't think my father ever charged him a dime for that. It was kind of tradition in that my grandmother did the same thing for Ray. He'd bring the cows up, and they'd breed them with my my grandfather's bull, and that was it.
That was one of the most exciting things when we were kids. We didn't have much excitement, really, but when we were my sister and I were little, I can remember maybe 4 or 5 or 6 years old, my father would come in the house and he'd get on the phone and he'd call the artificial breeding service. We didn't know what he was calling, but all we heard him say was something like, I'm going to need you over here today, Bessie's in heat. And my sister and I would hear, Bessie's in heat. We had no idea what that meant. All we knew, it meant it was something interesting, and we'd run down to the barn when he came, and we had these little stools, and we'd sit behind the cow and he'd watch the artificial breeder do his thing. We had no idea what he was doing. It was just really interesting stuff for us. You know, we'd sit there with our little stools and watch him take out this long tube. We had no idea what was in that tube or what he was doing. But that was probably our excitement. That's about as exciting as life got for us little kids. I think the population back then was probably less than it is. What's the population in Falls Village right now?
About 1,100.
Yeah, I think it was back then. I think it was in the 600 or 700. It was actually smaller, but the town was a lot busier. It was very, very busy.
You had auto dealerships and grocery stores.
Yeah, 2 grocery stores. I mean, in the center of the town, there were 2 grocery stores, the plumbing store.
There was even a barber there.
Post office, barber. And you either went to one grocery store or the other. You didn't go to both. Like, there were people that would only go to Hamsies, and there were people that would only go to Bob Graham's.
I have a story
You
about
wouldn't go to
Hamsies.
one or the other. And
Great.
you could, you could phone in your order. It was like the precursor of Peapod delivery service, I guess. I remember my mother would give us a little list, and we'd phone Bob Graham's when we were little, and she'd tell them what you want, give them the list, tell Bob Graham what we wanted, and then at the end we would always say, and can you charge it? And he would say, sure, and then he'd charge it, and next thing you know, it'd be delivered to the house.
He used to deliver?
Sometimes, yes, he would deliver. Yeah, yeah. Often we would go down and shop, but he would deliver too.
I remember the Iceman delivering way back in the 40s in Falls Village. You used to have an Iceman. Remember, I think it was Mr. Schneider, wasn't it? I think it was Steve Schneider's father.
Icebox.
Yeah, we had an Ice-A-Box. And the iceman would come and bring the ice, and then we had milkman, you know, the milkman. And,
Greengrocer?
pardon?
Had a greengrocer come by?
Yeah, we did.
No.
Mr. Rendino used to come up from Torrington with his cart with all his green stuff in it,
No.
vegetables and everything, and we would go out and pick the
I
vegetables.
wonder why we never had a greengrocer.
I don't know. He would always give us the old lettuce for our rabbit too. If he had old lettuce, he'd
You
give
had
us-
pet rabbits?
Yeah, we had pet rabbits. And he'd give us the lettuce for the pet
What did
rabbit.
you do with the rabbits?
I think probably died.
What kind of rabbits?
I don't know, it was a long time ago. I don't know. And the
Yeah.
bread man would come by and deliver bread. And if you wanted dry cleaning done, you'd put a little sign in your window and the dry cleaning man would stop and pick up your dry cleaning.
Boy, what service, huh?
Didn't you
Yeah.
go anywhere?
Yeah.
Don't get that today.
No.
How did you folks meet? That's what I want to know. Then in Yukon?
No. No, I never,
Well, I never
I'm-
wanted to meet her, really. I had an image of the little free girls, you know, in grade school. And they were always dressed alike,
dressed alike.
same dresses, always giddy and running around like skinny minis. And so I don't know, I just didn't pay attention to them. That was in grade school. And then, so I was aware of her all the time, but, you know, didn't think much about it.
I was aware of him too, but I didn't.
So
really
I got
like
out of
him.
the service, actually, in 1960, was it? I guess it was 60.
60.
And I took a job as lifesaver at the Falls Village Rec Center. And Midge shows up, and then I took an interest in her. So that's how we met.
Yeah, I really, the only thing I knew about him when I was growing up, because he was 4.5 years older, 5 years older, so the only thing I really knew is I wasn't that crazy about him. He kind of frightened me. I thought he was a bully, although he wasn't. But I always thought he was. If I happened to be on the same bus, if he was in the back, I'd sit way in the front because he kind of scared me.
She didn't even know me.
And he went away to the service, and I didn't think I really didn't think that much about him. And then he came back, and first time I saw him was at a PTO meeting, and they introduced him, and we all went, "Wow, he's
I thought that
cute."
was the interview for the...
No, I don't know what it was, but we thought he was cute. And then I went swimming every day after that to make sure that,
You were noticed.
yeah, and he noticed me, and that was it. Now Paul didn't never believe this, but my sister confirmed it at Easter time.
This year? Yeah.
The first time I came home and told my mother, I said, Paul Cortesi asked me out. I'm going out with him to play tennis, which I had no idea how to do, to play tennis. And she said, no, you are not going out with that boy. I am not going to let you go out with that. Paul Cortesi, no. He's going to come up here with a motorcycle, a black leather jacket. You are not getting on the motorcycle with that boy. He never even owned a motorcycle. So she was rather upset that he had asked me out. But once she met him, she thought he was wonderful. Right up until the end, she thought he was wonderful. So
It worked out.
it worked out fine. Worked out fine.
Tell me, Paul, what did you do in the Air Force? You were in the Air Force during Korea?
No,
No?
Vietnam.
Vietnam.
Just before I signed up in, what must have been 19... I got out of the service in 64, not 60.
That's right, it was 64.
Yeah. I went in the service in 1960 after I dropped out of college. And that was just before the Vietnam War.
Uh-huh.
And I almost got extended because of the Vietnam War, but I did not get extended. But I was in during that time. And I was in electronics, air-to-air aircraft, which would be mainly they supplied the 102s and the 104s, 105s, and I think the 101s. These are jet aircraft with rockets that were fired from air, meaning the aircraft, to take down another aircraft in the air. And they were just, most of them were conventional rockets, but we did work on nuclear rockets also, so, which didn't have to hit the aircraft directly. They go into a whole flight of aircraft and just take them all out. You know. So that's what I studied 4 in the service, and I got out of the service in 1964, and that was the end of my electronic career field. I'm getting out of the service after 4 years. Matter of fact, I got an early out because I finally figured out what I was going to do. And I decided to go to veterinary school because it should have hit me in the face right off the bat, because Dr. Hines, who was a veterinarian locally up in Salisbury, and I knew him well because he used to come to the farm all the time, so I helped him all the time when I was a child right up through high school. It should have hit me earlier than it did, but it didn't. That's what I'm going to become, so I became a veterinarian. And went on to Cornell thereafter for 4 years. Anyway, I've got to show you, again, my picture. You got to make sure you get this
Yeah,
picture.
he's going to, Paul. I'll send it to him. I'll
Okay.
email it to him. So.
But the reason I like this picture is it's got my grandfather, Paul J. Cortesi III, driving his cattle down Route 63, which hasn't been paved yet, living in the background here in this house over here is Eric's house. Here, the guy who's filming this, his home.
We used to go to the library a lot, though, as kids. My mother didn't drive until I was in high school, and she used to put my sister and I in this little two-seater carriage, and she'd walk us from the farm all the way down to the library, which was about a mile, on that little narrow road by the cemetery. And every week we'd go down and we'd get books or go to story hour. And then when I was about 12, I probably finished all the young people's books, Nancy Drew, that I could in the library, because the young people's section was just when you go upstairs in the library, that little corner to the left. It was like 2 shelves, and I had gone all through them, so I started going into the adult section, because there was more to read there, so I'd go into the adult section. But the librarian, Mrs. Kester, who was a little tiny, short little lady, with a little squeaky voice, there were certain books she wouldn't let me read. I can remember taking out a book and she'd look through it and she'd say, "I'm sorry, honey, but this book isn't for you. I can't let you take it out." And so I'd be very sad and I'd put it back, and then my mother would go down and check it out for me and let me read it. It was not the only thing I think in that particular book was about a couple that had gotten married and they went to live on an island and the baby died. So she thought that was probably too sad for me to read, or too adult to read about babies dying. There were a couple of unique characters.
Yeah.
Unique characters. There were 2 that I remember in Falls Village. One was, I think her name was called Bertha Thompson. I'm not sure.
Sounds right.
She lived next to the depot, in a house next to the depot. It had lots and lots and lots of cats. But she was a little bit off, I think, because she thought she was the sheriff. And I can remember that. She thought she was the sheriff, and I can remember her marching up the street. She had this big cane, and she would march up the street, and she thought she was the sheriff. And scared my sister and I to death. If we were downtown waiting for my father in the store, and we were sitting in the car, and we saw her walking up, we'd duck down in the car like this and then put our heads up, hoping she wouldn't arrest us, because we thought we were getting arrested. And apparently, from what I heard, is that Joe Hamsey made a badge for her that said sheriff on it. And she used to wear that badge. I remember seeing her wear a badge, but I don't remember what it looked like. But we found a couple of years ago in the Historical Society a leather star-shaped badge that says sheriff on it. I'm betting that's probably the badge that he gave her to wear. And the other character that I remember really well was Mrs. Wooden. Mrs. Wooden was a widow, and she lived up at the top of Sugar Hill, at the very, very, very last house on the top of Sugar Hill. It was a really rundown house. And we have a very interesting story about her in the Historical Society. Someone actually did an interview with her. But it was a very rundown house. She had some cows. She had a farm. She was another one who was all dressed in black. I guess ladies that were dressed in black scared kids when they were little. They probably thought she was a witch. She had these bright red cheeks, and she would walk all the way from the top of Sugar Hill to our farm on Page Road to ask my father if she could buy some hay, because he used to sell her hay for her cows. And she would walk all that way, which is a long walk, and we would see her coming in the driveway, and we'd be looking out the window, and we'd see her we ducked down like that because we didn't want her to see us because she scared us. And my father took us up one day when he went to deliver hay to her in his old farm truck. He had an old farm truck, and he went up to deliver hay, and it must have been in the spring because it was really, really muddy in her driveway. And my father got the truck stuck, and my sister and I were sitting in the truck, the two of us, and got the truck stuck, and he couldn't get it out. He kept going back and forth and back and forth. And then he went in the house to talk to her, and he came back out again. And my father, being my father, because he would do things like this, he opened the door of the truck, and he knew how scared the two of us were. And he said, "Well, girls, looks like we're going to have to stay in Mrs. Wooden's house for the night." We started to cry, "No, no, no." But that was my father. He would do that, but he did get the truck out, and we got home safely. But actually, probably today, as an adult, knowing her, I probably would have, enjoyed stopping to talk with her and find out what she was like. But as a child, she was very unique character, very interesting character. Christmas, I remember Christmas was always a nice time because it wasn't, I don't know, did you get a lot of presents? We never got a lot of presents at Christmas time back then. It was very simple. And my father would always go out in the woods. Of course, being on a farm, you had your own trees, so you cut your own tree. There were no tree farms, and he would always go out and he'd cut down a tree. Always one of those white pines, which have those branches you can't hang anything from. But that was what we had, so that's what we got, was a white pine. And we didn't have a tree stand with water in it. And I don't know why he didn't have a tree stand with water in it.
Because he used an old stump.
He always used an
Drilled
old
a hole
stump.
in an old stump.
He would drill a hole in an old stump, and then he'd stick the tree in there. And of course, we couldn't have lights on the tree because it would dry out because there was no water.
Fire hazard.
The house was heated with wood. We didn't have central heat, so the house was heated with wood. So the house was really dry and warm. So we never had lights on the tree. So my father always at Christmas time, he made a star, a blue star, painted it blue and put glitter on it. And then he would put it at the top of the tree, and then he did that, and we had those light fixtures in the middle of the room, and he put a blue bulb in the light fixture, and then we would turn out the lights, and he would turn on the blue bulb, and he would turn it towards the star, and the star would glitter. We thought that was the most wonderful thing in the world. That was like, oh, Christmas has come. Your camera.
Boy, he's big. Did you do any hunting, Paul?
Oh, I'm the last of the big hunters.
Are you serious or
No,
sarcastic?
he did.
I'm serious.
Well, that's how life was different.
We used to have venison all the time, We'd get an old buck that we got, and they're kind of tough, so we'd have Friday night and Saturday night sessions where we had all the meat cutting equipment. We had grinders, slicers, and what have you, tenderizers. We'd always take the old bucks and grind them up into hamburger and get some pork and mix with them, and then make great sausage or something else other than hamburger, because it would make good hamburger too, but you had to mix the pork with it together to get it good. And then hunting with all the men around that were there when we hunted. Guess who the guy was that skinned the deer and gutted them? Little Paul. Because the other guys couldn't tolerate it because they would start, getting
Gagging?
nauseous.
They
So,
weren't real hunters.
I guess that's how I got into veterinary medicine, I guess. Being brought up on the farm and gutting deer and skinning them. And they always had to have a special knife, which I have to this day, actually. I still have that knife that I used to use for skinning and gutting. And
But there was a point when you couldn't shoot deer anymore, right?
No, the last
You
time,
got to one point you couldn't do it.
there are 2 times that I can reflect on in, I would say, the not so recent years, but when I stopped hunting, and that was in about when I got out of the service in 1964. I did hunt for a while, but then I was up in the woods one day just testing my abilities out as a hunter, and I was sitting on a trail waiting for some deer to go by, and sure enough, 2 of them came right by me.
With the fawn.
No, and they were just 2, yearling deer, and I just didn't have the heart to shoot them because it was so simple. I said, "Get out of here," So they took off. So I said, what are they going to do now? So I knew where they went, and I knew there was a trail down that way where they were going, and I knew that trail went up over the cobble. I knew it by the castañas, and I knew it came back this way on the other side of the cobble. So I, from that point, went up over the cobble and sat there on that trail waiting for them to go by. Sure enough, there they went. So
And you couldn't shoot.
I couldn't shoot again. So that was my last days of hunting. Unless I get really hungry in the future, I don't think I could do it.
Softy.
Yeah. But, no, it's interesting, the number of guns we had in our house as a child, though. I had guns all over the place. Because the guys from Torrington used to come hunting on the farm, hunting the woodchucks, hunting the deer, and just target practicing. Once they gave me a 400 caliber elephant gun to just bust me up a little bit, and told me, "Okay, Paul, you up the power line there, see that big rock? Shoot that rock up there." So I lay over the stone that we used to shoot from, get all set up, boom! I weighed 98 pounds. It practically blew me off the rock, and they all laughed, of course. But we used to have 243s, 222s, 218Bs, 32 specials, shotguns, 12 gauge, 16 gauge. I mean, had at least 20 guns in the house. They're all sitting in the corner there. And not one of those guns ever jumped out and killed anybody. It's amazing. I guess it gets back to, again, respecting other people.
What else did you hunt?
Well,
Squirrel,
we used to do squirrels and partridge.
Partridge.
Yeah. And we used to, we wouldn't, well, actually we did eat muskrat a couple of times. Not muskrat, I'm sorry. We ate woodchuck. We used to hunt woodchucks all the time because they, back then the farmers in the 50s didn't like the holes in their fields because horses would step in them and break a leg, or a cow would step in them. So we always shoot the woodchucks. And, but we ate some young ones once. They're okay as long as you take out, I guess you're supposed to take out the lymph nodes, from what I understand. They impart a nasty flavor. So we always took out the lymph nodes. But we used to do muskrats. We'd hunt. My uncle, who was in World War II in the military, when he came home on leave, and this was so, throughout the 50s, he used to bring his traps along and take me along. We'd go muskrating. We caught a mink once, but mainly we got muskrats. And actually we used to do that down on the Castagna farm, because he knew the Castañas. And I think Mrs. Castagna was still alive back then, and she'd let us go down there and muskrat the swamp. And the sad part about that is, of course, when you catch a muskrat, you got to kill him with something, right? And we used to bring a bat along.
Okay.
No pistol, just a bat. But
Well, that's what everybody did.
But we ate, our staple back then, as far as meat was concerned, was mainly venison. For our family and about 3 others. And we'd all get together on a Saturday night, like I said, have a meat cutting agenda online. And if we had a fresh deer, a young one, that was tender, we'd cut the tenderloins out, slice them up at midnight, throw them in the frying pan with some butter, and get a little wine out. And the elders in the room would drink coffee royales along with the tenderloin. And what they would do, now a lot of guys that drank the coffee royales didn't like certain liquors, and what they loved in their coffee royales was Fleischmann's. And I have to admit, Fleischmann's was the best.
Gin.
No,
No.
whiskey
Whiskey.
mixed with
Were you drinking it too?
I'd have sips, but in my later years when I had a little sip of something, like even if I'm making a ginger ale, you cannot beat Fleshman's in a ginger ale, rye
Because
ginger.
it's cheap.
Well, it's cheap, rye gut stuff, but it was good. Because it imparts a nice flavor to a ginger ale that you wouldn't get with other liqueurs, you know. So, but the strange thing is my mother used to make the greatest coffee back then, and it was with Nescafe. And I asked her recently how she made it, and the secret, I think, was she'd get the coffee in just a stainless steel pot. It would be a boiling water. And then when it was boiling, she'd turn it off and immediately put the X amount of coffee in there to make, 10 cups.
Instant coffee, right?
Instant coffee. And it would foam up, and I mean, it was unbelievable. But when that settled down, that was the best coffee I ever had in my life. I've never had coffee that good to this day. I try to duplicate it, I can't.
Just doesn't have your mother's
Get a
touch.
stainless steel, That's the other thing. My mother used to bring me, when I was milking cows in the morning, I used to milk every morning and every evening before I went to school and I got back from school. And I used to milk 60 cows with 4 machines, and I was the only guy that was there. My father didn't help me that much. But in the morning when I was down there before school, my mother would bring me my breakfast down, and that breakfast consisted of I was a kid in high school, a quart of coffee
I bet your teachers loved you.
with 4 egg sandwiches with bacon in them and eggs. Oh my God, to die for. And so can you imagine how wired I was when I went to school?
She was bad enough to start with.
No wonder I was stunted.
The only other thing I was thinking about, like entertainment, what we did back then
Yeah.
for entertainment.
Good.
We used to take the train up to Canaan when we were like 12 years old. We would, I think, cost 25 cents or 50 cents to take the train. That was when the trains were running back and forth. And we'd take the train to Canaan for the day, just not with our parents, but just alone. We felt independent. Take the train, we'd go up, we'd have, at Charlie's restaurant, we would have a hamburger and a Coke. And then we'd do a little shopping at Hart's 5 and 10 cent store, and then we'd go to the movies, and then we'd take the train back home. And that was like a big deal for us. And we felt independent, and we could get away from our mothers. And it was not very expensive. It was just a nice little trip.
On the movie thing, I want to get to the movie thing.
The movie thing.
This is an important part of the 50s and growing up, and that's the drive-in theater.
Oh, yes.
Where was that?
That was in Canaan, and we used to take and put hay on the back of our truck and go to the drive-in theater with the kids in the neighborhood and everything. Bring everything we needed right in the truck and just back it up to the screen, and voila, have a great time.
The drive-in theater was great.
And everybody went to the drive-in theater back then.
Grover Atwood, there was
That's
one...
Tracy's father?
Tracy's father.
Uh-huh.
I remember one very kindness about him. Once my father, they didn't take my father's milk anymore and he developed his own milk route, there wasn't a lot of money in it. So we didn't have a lot of money at that point. And the church used to do a lot of trips. We would go roller skating and things like that. And the church had a roller skating trip up to Great Barrington and it cost 75 cents to go. And my father had a little cigar box on top of his refrigerator where he kept his milk in the milk house. And when people would buy their milk, they put the money in the cigar box. Sometimes people would come by and steal the money. Instead of putting money in, they'd take money out. So whenever we needed money for something, my mother would say, well, go down and see if there's any in the box. So we'd go down. We each needed 75 cents to go roller skating. And my sister and I went down, and there wasn't any money in the box. So we came back and we said, there's no money. And my mother said, well, then we're not going to be able to go because we didn't have, $1.50 in the house. There just wasn't any money. And we would go on Grover Atwood's truck. He'd fill it all with hay, and we'd go on a hayride. So he drove up to the house to pick us up. And I saw my mother go out and talk to him, and she was shaking her head, we can't, the kids can't go, we don't have any money. And he said to her, don't worry about it. He took the money out of his pocket and he gave it to her and she gave it to us. So to me, that was a very kind thing to do, because some people would just say, oh, I'm sorry about that,
Yeah.
and just go on.
Yeah.
And I mean, you think $1.50, but $1.50 back then was, quite a bit of money. Yeah, but that was a kindness that I have to say for Grover Atwood.
I think you were going to tell us how high school life was different in the 60s.
Definitely different. In fact, I was just looking at my high school student handbook where they had the dress code. Definitely different. I mean, the girls were allowed to wear slacks or shorts. No slacks or shorts. The boys couldn't wear blue jeans. No, they couldn't have any blue jeans. They had to wear regular pants. Nothing tight.
Button-up collars.
The shirts had to be, they could be open one button, but that was all. You couldn't have the shirts open beyond one button. No t-shirts. Boys weren't allowed to wear t-shirts at all.
No body piercings.
They didn't say that.
I
They didn't
know,
even know
I
there was
did.
such a thing back then. No taps on shoes. People don't even wear taps today, but back then the guys especially used to wear those taps and make lots of noise. I think it was a very insulated world compared to today. The high school, we were very naive. It was very naive. I know girls weren't treated the same. I will say girls weren't treated the same as boys. And I told people this before. And on career day, I signed up for, someone was coming in to talk about the technology behind radio, like the sound, or the background behind movies and music and television and all that. And I was really interested in that. I wanted to do the background stuff. I was fascinated, so I signed up for it. And I was called down to the guidance office and they said, "I'm sorry, but you can't do that." And I said, "Why not?" They said, "Because that's only for the boys. That's not for the girls."
It's called the misguidance office.
So I said, "Well, what can I sign up for?" And they said, "Well, there are 4 things the girls can sign up for. They can sign up for nursing, beautician, secretary, or teacher." But I didn't want to do any of those things, but I had to choose one of those things, and that's what I ended up choosing, and I wish I hadn't chosen it.
Did you go to nursing school?
Mm-hmm.
You did.
Yeah,
Yes,
she's
you
a
did?
bona fide nurse.
Well, I'm glad we mentioned that.
Probably if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't.
Part of the medical
Do it.
profession I have to contend with every day. Because I'm in
But
the,
look, that was one of the 4 choices, see?
Yeah.
I could be a teacher, nurse, beautician, or secretary, so.
You chose the most challenging,
Yeah, the most stressful.
most stressful. And you did that up until you started having 3 kids?
4. Oh, 3. I had 3. Yeah, and I stopped once they were born because I wanted to stay home with them.
Good.
Financially, it wasn't easy, but I think it was the best thing. And then when it came time to go back to work, because my daughter went to college and we needed the money, I thought about going back into nursing and I just didn't want to do it. It was just, even though there's more money, it was just too stressful and it changed so much. It wasn't as much patient care anymore as, documenting everything that you did and the bookwork and all that. So I applied for a job as a librarian in the school and I got that job and it was much better.
What about this funny story you had
Oh, my
about the milk
My
inspector?
father. It was just my own little story about how quirky my father was and how his sense of humor was. There's kind of a strange family sense of humor, right?
mm-hmm.
My brother has it.
Yeah.
Henry has it. Our son has it. And we had the milk inspector used to come around every once in a while to inspect the milk. His name was George. I won't say his last name. Everybody probably know who I'm talking about, but his name was George. And he would come and inspect. He was not really a farmer type of person, or maybe, just he would come like dressed in nice clothes and everything. But he always came at dinner time. He always managed to come at dinner time and do his milk inspection, and then he would come in the house when we were eating. And it was always like he was kind of hinting that he wanted to stay for dinner, so my mother would always ask him, "Well, George, would you like to stay for dinner?" And George would always say, "Well, what are you having?" Which really annoyed my mother because
Sure.
she thought, he's only going to stay if I'm cooking something good. So she used to get really annoyed with him, and if he had something that she liked, he'd sit down and we'd eat dinner. And he came in one night. My mother was making a meal. It was like meatballs with rice in it, and they were called porcupine balls because the little things stuck out, the little rice things stuck out and looked like porcupines. So George came in, and my mother was there cooking, and he was talking, and then, you know, obviously he wanted to stay for dinner. So my father said, well, George, you want to stay for dinner? And George said, well, what are you having? And my father looked at George and he said, porcupine balls, George. And George took off out the door. That was it. He said, no, I don't think I'll stay. And at the time, it didn't even, I was only a child, so I didn't even think, well, you know, maybe he just doesn't like ground beef or something. But as I got older, then I realized, and my mother and father used to joke about it all the time. Remember the time George wouldn't stay for dinner?